bringing you a Sophianic broadcast featuring visionary teacher John Lamb Lash.
Hello to each and all out there. It's April 20th, 2018 in the afternoon. I'm here with Mega in the studio of Radio Gaianym, and we're going to engage in an impromptu talk about the moon. And we do love the moon, don't we?
We certainly do.
I said recently on a talk on Mandela Effect Decoded channel, introducing Mommy, I said right out front in no uncertain terms that the moon is your teacher, the moon is your instructor. You would certainly concur with that statement.
Absolutely, although I don't think you've ever stated it that sort of explicitly and clearly.
No, I haven't. That's true. So what's your experience of the moon being your teacher? As a witch who lives in the woods and the wilds and follows the ways of nature and the omens of the animals in the sky, what's your relationship, and as a woman as well, to the moon?
That's a really big question. Let me pause on that in a minute. Well, first of all, there's a strong attraction. So there's a pull. There's the pull of the moon, which is physiological as well as, it's visual. So you want to see it. You want to notice where the moon is, and it stimulates this, well, what's going on? What's going on? And so the moon gives rise to questions about what is happening. What is why am I feeling, this way? There's a lot of feeling attached to it. So the moon inspires questions about what's going on, how's it working with the plants, what's happening, because you notice it, you observe it. But then once coming into PT and you start talking to other people about what's going on with the moon, you find that it's more than that. It isn't just the physiological, then you get the psychological. And you find that there's certain themes that are coming through that everyone gets in their unique way, but you discover that there are the common themes, because we talk about that, and of course then that deepens the relationship. So then you want to look at the moon even more, and then you start to look out and discover, well, hang on, it's where the moon is. And so you find that it's not that the information is coming from the moon, but the moon is like prompting the relationship between the moon, where it seems to prompt questions that stimulate, you ask questions about what's going on. That's how it's that relationship.
Well, I certainly agree with that concept, and I think that's a really helpful concept. The idea of the moon as a prompting device. Those in the practice of Planetary Tantra know by heart and by moment-to-moment experience what it means to be prompted by the moon, don't we? So we'll get into that further in the course of this conversation. But taking it back to your experience as a woman, I'm sure you've heard the rumor going around the planet that there was a time in the past when women menstruated together at the same time. And of course, it is an old rumor. We don't know if it holds true anymore, because there's a lot of Xenosh propaganda about transhumanism and the destruction of the gender binary and the destruction of gender as a whole, right? The destruction of gender is a goal of the Xenosh transhumanists, right? But still, there remains a faint rumor that the moon was somehow connected with women's menstruation. Where did that come from?
Yeah, but it's absolutely true. I mean, and I noticed this before coming into PT, when I worked as a therapist in London, and I would have work with lots of women. We would start to synchronise, and very clearly you'd start your menstruation on the new moon. It was absolutely noticeable, and I cannot credit the Xenosh with orchestrating that.
Well, that's remarkable because, I use the word rumor, sarcastically. It's like to say a rumor about women's menstruation being connected with the cycles of the moon. It is only a rumor these days because we're so far away from the primordial understanding of our relation to the cycles of the cosmos that it's like, it's a really weird thing to say. But you're telling me you've experienced synchronization of women's menstrual cycles to the new moon.
Yeah.
Directly.
Absolutely. A direct experience. And it's interesting when you say, we're so far removed, because it's also, you don't recognise the significance of things that are happening. So this is something that I observed, that the women I worked with observed, but we didn't understand the significance of that because we didn't have a framework of the Sophianic narrative of the our own sort of history and the history of our species, our story. We didn't have that, so it's kind of like, it's just a curious little thing that happens,
right? But you have no context to place it in, right?
No, it's interesting.
Well, this is a brilliant and important observation coming from your experience as a woman. And it leads into one of the themes that I want to cover in this impromptu talk, this impromptu conversation, which is the theme of entrainment. So there are many ways to conceive of what entrainment is. There are many forms of entrainment. But let's see if you would go along with this one. We could say that from time before reckoning, it was understood in many cultures around the world that woman's menstrual cycle was entrained by the moon. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that is such a powerful event. That is such a what is the message in that? That, just think about that for the moment. Even if today there's enormous confusion in the gender binary due to the destructive input of the Xenosh, wishing to destroy the tantric relation between the sexes, the tantric dynamic of male-female. Even if there is enormous derangement of the female cycles by hormones, by the food, by the chemicals in the food, nevertheless, this ancient story remains that there was a primordial entrainment between a woman's body and the cycles of the moon. Mm. And the question, or the challenge of that comes up in my mind is this. It takes this form. Well, if the ancient rumor or the ancient record shows that women were physiologically entrained by the moon, well, what else can be entrained by the moon? Mm. And would it be possible for us to rediscover and reclaim the entrainment of the moon? Or to use another word, the attunement to the moon. See? So to me, the loss of that sense of the woman's alignment of her menstrual cycle with the moon, which has largely been lost by most women, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
The loss of that is at the same time the opportunity to recover something even greater, which is our connection to the moon, our attunement to the lunar cycles.
So when you say other ways of entrainment, what do you mean by that?
Well, let's consider that for a moment. You've come here today in the studio, and when you came in, I proposed that we talk about the moon. My reason for proposing that was because I received an email this morning from someone called Sharon, who said that she was confused or befuddled, might have been the word she used, about the moon and the importance of the moon as a teacher. And she mentioned in her email something that many people listening may know about. That is David Icke's account of what he heard about the moon from the Zulu shaman Credo Mutwa. Okay? So this goes back quite a few years, doesn't it? I don't know how long ago. There was like a 3-hour interview with Credo Mutwa and David Icke on the internet. You can find it floating around. So anyway, apparently, as the story goes, this encounter with an African shaman led David Icke to come out and say, what? That the moon is an artificial satellite, not a part of nature. It's an artificial satellite that was constructed and apparently dragged into place, as Credo Mutwa says, dragged into place by the Chidori, which is the Zulu equivalent of the Anunnaki archons. So David Icke got this piece of Zulu folklore that led him to then come out and say to the public in his lectures at Wembley Auditorium and elsewhere that the moon is not really a natural part of the cosmos, but it's an artificial construct produced by archontic beings, and it's used as a mind control device. Right? Have you heard this story?
Yes, yeah, I have heard it. I haven't seen the interview or
right.
Or anything like that. I mean, I think a lot of these indigenous folklore tales were hacked a long time ago as well.
Good point.
Yeah. And they've been corrupted, and of course now it suits the purpose of various agents and collaborators to be able to use this to their advantage to present themselves as omniscient.
That's right.
But how do you counteract?
How do you counteract that?
Yeah.
Counteract it with the truth on Gnostic terms, right?
Yeah.
And we have the truth on Gnostic terms. Because the truth that we talk about, you can take it or leave it, you can like it or not. I don't care. But the truth that we talk about is from a direct experience of what we know. That is the authenticity of gnosis. It's direct knowing. So those in the practice of Planetary Tantra know directly that the moon is an organic part of the earth. Now, there's a term that you find in the Nag Hammadi writings. I've elaborated on this term. I've commented on it. It's a term in Greek that goes like this: the trimorphic protanoia. The trimorphic protanoia means the three-formed original thought. So what is the three-formed original thought? Well, that is a thought, an idea that was in the mind of the divine planetary mother when she was in the company of the Pleuromic gods at the galactic core. So she conceived, along with Thelete, the genome of the human species. They designed our genome. And when she was in the galactic core, prior to her fall or plunge from the pleroma, she conceived in this manner, in her imagination, in her divine imagination. She said, well, Thelete and I have produced this species, the anthropos. And now I'm dreaming and wondering, as an aeon does dream and wonder, about what kind of world it would appear, where it would appear. And she, as the divine mother of the anthropos, determined that it would appear ideally in a trimorphic protanoia, in a three-body system consisting of a planet, a moon, and the sun. So carrying forth this little fragment or anecdote of Gnostic cosmology to today, how do we understand this? We understand in the practice of Planetary Tantra that the sun, the moon, and the earth form an integral organic system altogether. It's trimorphic. It's three-part: sun, moon, earth. Therefore, the Gaian, the body of Gaia, is not simply the earth alone, is it? The principal organism of the body of Gaia is the earth, but the body of Gaia also includes the moon and the sun. Isn't that so?
Yeah, that's you have a shift in awareness when you see that, when you recognise that. Let's use the word, recognise, because not only does that change the relationship with the moon, but also with the sun. Because when you start, all this, the other alarmist about, the sun's going into
solar maximum, solar minimum.
Yeah. And the sun's going to sleep.
Right.
And,
or it's going to explode next week.
We're going to have a terrible, ice age. It's going to cover the whole planet, and it's going to be, well, that doesn't fit with the with that structure, with the trimorphic. What is it?
Protonoia.
Trimorphic protonoia. It doesn't. But then when you have that concept, trimorphic protonoia, then you can look at it with a different perspective, a different experience.
Absolutely. To use an old term, which actually was introduced by a South African philosopher, holistic. You can see it holistically.
Smuts.
Yeah, smuts. Yeah. That's right. You can see it holistically. So the earth, moon, and sun, holistically, are an organic unit captured within the inorganic planetary system. Yeah. And so in Planetary Tantra, you observe the cycles of the sun, the sunspot cycles, all the other activities of the sun, and the cycles of the moon each month as part of the living rhythms of Gaia, the Planetary Animal Mother. This is what we do, correct?
Yeah, and when you look at it that way, I see things and experience and recognise things differently to the mainstream narrative, which then you can see very clearly that, well, how can it possibly be that the moon is this, hollow spaceship?
A hologram or some kind of artificial satellite.
Yeah.
Let me address that for a minute. I'm going to say something about David Icke, okay? And about mind-controlled dupes. As far as I'm concerned, David Icke is a mind-controlled dupe. And I put him in the category of this woman. For instance, her name is, she goes by the name of Arizona Wilder. That's a pretty sexy name. And Arizona Wilder is very well known on the internet for her personal anecdotal accounts of being a mind-controlled sex slave of the Illuminati. Okay? So whatever her original name was, she comes out now as Arizona Wilder. And you'll see why I connect her with David Icke in a moment. So Arizona Wilder, is one of those voices on the internet who is not only claiming to be a victim of MK Ultra mind control / satanic sexual abuse and so forth of the Illuminati, but also to be someone who is whistleblowing on the Illuminati. And in a way, you could compare her to David Icke, who's also, in a way, whistleblowing on the Illuminati. It has to be said for David Icke that what he does say when he comes out and talks about the Jumans and the Zenosh and the Rothschilds, he does talk about the Rothschilds. Now, he doesn't attack Judaism or Judaic religion as such, but he talks about the Rothschilds as a criminal mafia. Okay? Well, what do David Icke and Alexander Wilder have in common? Well, they have two things in common. First thing is that they may well be exposing some of the nefarious activities of the evil perpetrators on this planet, the Illuminati, who may or may not be Xenosh, the Xenosh and their accomplices. They have that in common. But the second thing they have in common is that they bring in the reptilian theme. Now, why do they bring in the reptilian theme? Well, I'll tell you what I think about that. I think that they bring in the reptilian theme in order to discredit themselves. Can you follow that logic?
Yeah, I can. But why would they want to discredit themselves?
Let's take Arizona Wilder, okay? That's obviously not her name. She's obviously an American woman of a certain age, maybe in her early 50s. She's not unattractive. She claims to have been a sex slave and an MK Ultra victim. Now, it's widely known today through independent investigators on the internet that this MK Ultra program does exist, and many celebrities like Britney Spears and other people are said to be victims of MK Ultra programming and maybe sex slaves as well. If it were the case that there was a program of what it is called platforming, when you platform someone, you break their mind down into different personalities, and you train each of these personalities to work in a certain way, and the independent personalities, or alters as they're called, ALTERS, are not aware of each other. Let's say that this form of mind control really does exist. And let's say that Arizona Wilder is a genuine example of it. Those who programmed the woman, whatever her original name was, who calls herself Arizona Wilder, were certainly aware that at some moment their subject would break free of her programming.
Okay.
Just like the legend goes, the urban legend goes, that at a certain moment Britney Spears broke free of her MK Ultra programming, or someone else, broke out of it. This is a subject of great discussion. So suppose I'm an MK Ultra programmer, and I'm looking at my subject, Arizona Wilder, and I'm saying, well, we've got this woman pretty well programmed. We've had our pleasure with her. We've done with her what we like. There's always a possibility that she could break out of this programming, because human will is very, very powerful. Well, can we take some precautionary measure for that?
So it's like the self-destruct program.
Exactly. So what we'll do is we'll program into her alters a false program about reptilians and Anunnaki and aliens running the show. Actually, they're not. It's just nefarious three-letter agencies running the show. It's the CIA running the show. But as a CIA programmer in MK Ultra, I'm very happy to disguise myself as an alien in order to mislead the world from who I truly am. So this is what we'll do. We'll install an altar in Arizona Wilder that activates at the moment that she goes renegade and starts to whistleblow.
Yeah.
What will be the result of that? The result is that Arizona Wilder, in breaking out of her program, will say a lot of things that are true about the MK Ultra sex slave process. But on top of that, she will add the reptilian scenario, which will completely discredit everything else that she says in the eyes of some people. or at least it will render it very, very dubious, because it is in fact not true. So her claim that those who programmed her and tortured her sexually were reptilians is a false narrative that we program into her as a failsafe in case that she whistleblows on us. You follow my logic there?
Yeah, but there is also the element of the reptilian agenda having some correspondence, to the archons, one particular type of
the
archons.
draconic archons, right?
Yeah.
So there is a certain truth in the reptilian agenda, but it's not the truth that you're hearing from Arizona Wilder, and I warn you about that. Nor is it the truth that you are hearing from David Icke, the assertions you're hearing from him.
He's not MK Ultra, though.
No, he's not MK Ultra, but Credo Mutwa, who was Icke's source of this, what I would call nefarious disinformation about the moon, claims to have been abducted and tortured by the Chidari, which is the equivalent of the archons.
Oh, really?
Yes, he does. And he was sexually molested by archons, according to his own account. And he confesses that turned him into a homosexual. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Well, this is a noteworthy anecdote in the life of Credo Mutwa, and certainly something to pay attention to, you know. But let's get back to the moon here. I don't want to go on too much of a digression, because I want to come back to the good news about the moon and what a fantastic tool of entrainment it is for the human species. The point that I'm making is that Credo Mutwa said that the Chidari, who is the archons, told him that they created the moon as an artificial satellite to use to mind program the human species.
So that's separate to his indigenous folklore story, then?
It's mingled. Unfortunately, it's mingled with it. Credo Mutwa has I don't believe he lives today, a fantastic amount of genuine indigenous Zulu shaman knowledge to impart. And you will find the greater part of that knowledge in the story of the mystery of the White Lions and his discussions with Linda Tucker. I believe that was her name. Fantastic book. At the same time, there's a distortion in the intel coming from Credo Mutwa. And the distortion accounts for the fact that he was, in quotes, an alien abductee victim. He was the victim of an alien abduction. So, what he says about the moon comes from his psychotic episode of alien induction. What he says about the white lions and other things comes from genuine Zulu indigenous knowledge of the interspecies creation, interspecies relation between the humans and the lions. See? Yeah. So I believe it's very important to make that distinction.
Yeah. Well, it is, yeah, because they're...
two different scenarios, two different narratives.
And people bring them together.
And mix them up and mingle them.
And he has brought them together and mixed them up. And what it sounds as though, I hadn't heard that story about this abduction before, but there was some interference that wasn't from aliens.
That's right. Something terrible happened to him.
Yeah.
And he recounts this with great vulnerability and great transparency. So the point I want to make before we get back to the way that the moon is regarded in Planetary Tantra is that if Credo Mutwa said that the Chidari archons told him they created the moon and dragged it into place as a mind-controlled satellite, then you have to know on Gnostic terms that that's a lie, because the archons always lie.
But also they're pointing to the fact that there is something very significant about the moon, otherwise they wouldn't bother to lie about it.
Why this disinformation about the moon, which unfortunately David Icke has spread. So David Icke is widely known for asserting that the moon is not an organic part of the cosmos, as we claimed, trimorphic protonoia, that it is not a living part of the Gaian system of nature, that it is not a living and vital part of the dynamic of the divine experiment that we are in. This is all really, really unfortunate and misleading disinfo coming from David Icke. And although I agree, he is not a mind control dupe like Arizona Wilder. He may as fucking well be, excuse my English, but he may as well be, because he is repeating this disinformation.
And given a platform.
And given an enormous platform for it, you know? So even though a lot of David Icke's expose of the Rothschilds and the people behind the scenes who are driving humanity and the world into ruin is correct, there's an element of a self-discrediting element when he brings in this preposterous claim.
Yeah, because they have it both ways, don't they?
They have it both ways, don't they?
They always have it. That's the signature, isn't it? So, you know, he has to have some credibility by giving some kind of exposure, you know, like by saying, oh yes, we know that the Rothschilds and the Illuminati and the Zen, they're terrible.
Right.
You know, but he never gives any idea of, well, he distorts information, as we know, about the archons. He never gives the full story.
No.
He never gives anybody the tools to actually do any of the things that he says that people need to do. You know, and he pushes this agenda, but it's so terrible, they're so, you know, omniscient, they're so powerful, they're doing this, they even put the moon, you know, in place. You've got no chance.
That's right, you've got no chance, because the moon is controlling your mind.
Yeah.
You know, it's really clever what's been done with David Icke, and I think that he is, to a certain in a certain respect, an unwilling participant in one respect, but in another way, quite a willing participant.
Self-serving. I mean, you know, he does well enough out of it.
His Xenosh handlers, and you go investigate who runs his programs, who runs his worldwide tours, who pays, have said to him, oh, yeah, well, it's fine. David will allow you to say all these damning and condemning things about the Rothschilds, not Judaism, and not the Xenosh as a people, but the Rothschilds, mafia, you know, everybody knows. The Rothschilds are a financial mafia, big fucking deal. Oh, we'll let you say all that, but we also want you to say this other thing about the reptilians that will discredit you in the eyes of many people. We want you to say both things, because that's the method of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, that's clear, very clear.
So we'll set all that aside at the half-hour point, and now we'll go to the fun part, and the delight, and the joy, which is our experience of the moon, which is at the heart of Planetary Tantra, and something that, well, right now, for instance, where are we today? April 20th, 2018, and let it be recorded in the annals of Planetary Tantra that there is a perigee surge right now, around 3 in the afternoon, with the moon in 91 degrees of the ecliptic, which is at the feet of the twins, in the constellation of the twins. So this is intel that we observe in Planetary Tantra. Now, how would you translate that intel to someone who doesn't know anything about the technicalities?
Well, I guess you would start by saying that in the moon's orbit, there are points, because it's not a circular,
perfect circle.
It's not a circular orbit. It's it's an oval kind of shape, an elliptical shape. There are points when it is closer and when it's further away from the Earth, and those aren't just random. There are key 2 points twice in the lunar cycle. 1 point when it's closer and 1 point when it's further, and each of those has a function within the trimorphic protonoia.
That's right, and each of them has a detectable effect that those who follow the life cycles of the planetary mother can sense. Isn't that true?
Yeah, it is, and it's really changed a lot, because initially when we first started in the G&E, watching the apogees and the perigee was much easier.
That's
to
right.
detect.
That's right.
The perigee was more about first attention and direct observation, and you just noticed what showed up in your life. But now it's the other way around. The apogees, which are more about your memory and what's coming into the phylogenetic memory for us and her memory, for us to relate to experience, is often much clearer than what's happening with the perigee. That's how it seems to me.
Certainly to me as well. What Megar is referring to here is a process of observation I set up in the G&E from March 2011 to March 2014. And in that experiment, I invited people to participate with me each month to observe the moment of the perigee, like now, when the moon is closest to the Earth, and the apogee, about 2 weeks later, when the moon is most distant from the Earth. And when I set up the G&E, I simply said, let's observe these moments and see what comes up. Let's observe them outwardly. Let's see if there are earth changes, if there are sounds in the sky, if there are floods, if there are earthquakes that could be related to that particular moment. And that is most certainly the case, right? Mm-hmm. But let's also observe if there are interpsychic moments or emotional qualities, emotional and mental and intellectual factors that come up in our lives that could somehow be related to these cycles of the moon. And we did that intensely, meticulously, over 3 years, didn't we? Mm-hmm. It was an astonishing process, and it was quite an astonishing discipline. It really was.
Yeah, and this is how the moon teaches you. This is exactly, you set your course to learn something, your intention, and that's what happens. It shows up, but you have to recognise it.
Yeah, the lunar cycles, the Mooner cycles, you can call them that if you want to, operate in some respect like a radio that chooses its own channels. So suppose that you have a radio in the corner of your room, which is your office or your room where you tend to hang out. And that radio has a dial on it, and it has various channels on it. And so let's say that you leave the radio on, but when you're leaving it on, you don't necessarily hear something until a certain moment when the radio dials up its own channel, and then suddenly you're sitting there, maybe you're having a cup of tea and you just opened your email, and suddenly the channel comes on, the radio comes on, it starts to broadcast the channel. This is what happens at the perigee and apogee. Would you say that's a pretty good analogy? And the brilliance of the method of Planetary Tantra is that we anticipate that moment when that happens. So we bring our attention to that moment, and therefore we're able to become conscious of that moment in a way that's not possible if you just ignore it or you're not aware that it's happening. That's the practice, right?
Yeah. And there's multi-levels to it, because of course you have the crescent moon, which when we observe the crescent, this informs us of the mood of that shift. So the key, you have. It's not so much an idea of the key themes. It's more like a it's the frequency of it. It's there'll be a particular flavour to it that will.
That's right.
That you kind of get at the initially, but you actually can't. I can't actually unpack it fully until I get to the end of into completion of the shift. Right. So you see, we observe the crescent. So this shift, it was just coming into the bull.
That's right.
And so it's a Bhudevi Tara. So we know that. But then when you get to the perigee, there's going to be a hit on something that is related to the bigger theme. So this comes back to the holism again.
And it comes back to the simple concept that the moon is your teacher. Mm-hmm. You think of it as an instructor. Think of being a child and going to the pool or the beach and learning how to swim. So you arrive there and there's your instructor is going to teach you how to swim. Or when they say go skiing, there's the ski instructor. The moon is the instructor in the moods of the Earth planet, of the living organism of the planet. The planet Earth, whatever its shape may be, and this is another subject coming up soon, is an animal, a great, great animal, and she has moods. And we entrain ourselves to her moods by following the lunar cycle. Therefore, to us in Planetary Tantra, it's completely and utterly ridiculous to claim that this body, this brilliant and glorious celestial orb, is some kind of archontic, artificial satellite that is put in place to mind control us. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. Yet, at the same time, I would say that what for some people is mind control, for us is voluntary entrainment. So if you want to believe that the moon is an instrument of mind control, then you will be mind controlled by the moon and whatever the agenda is.
Well, it's a narcissistic delusion, really, isn't it? To think that you can actually escape any kind of, the entrainment, the mind of the planet. I mean, good luck.
The entrainment of the planet to your mind, to your body, to your emotions is the single most powerful field of morphic resonance that exists. I'm going to talk about morphic resonance in a moment because I've got some books laid out here. So let's talk about this concept of entrainment, which I brought up in the talk introducing Mommy. So, Mommy, M-O-M-I-E, okay. So the entrainment is the E, is the entrainment to the memory, the mood, and the ideation of the Aeon Sophia, who is the mother planet. So what Planetary Tantra offers is a simple practice for your body, your mind, your emotions, your imagination, your sexuality, to entrain yourself to the earth and to detach from the entrainment to every other artificial medium existing today, right? So what are some of the artificial mediums that entrain people today to the detriment of the human species? We could talk about that for 4 hours, right?
Yeah, pods and pads and...
iPad. I don't know what the difference is between an iPad and an iPod, a tablet, an Android. But that's just the obvious parts. When you see people walking down the street of the city, no longer interacting with other human beings. When you see people in cafes, no longer listening to the conversation of the cafe and maybe picking up something here and meeting someone and having a discovery of something with another human being, they're all locked onto their touch screen devices. That's obvious, but entrainment of food. Say something about that.
Oh. Well, people get used to things that aren't real food.
Like chicken McNuggets.
Yeah, and addictions, like sugar. So they become, and into the routine of having to, eat at a particular time, which is all, it's all set up as an entrainment, so that you set up a habit that is a habit that makes you useful to the force matrix, makes you, you're a slave of that process.
Fluoride is an entrainment tool. What are these chemicals that they put in the cans, in the packaging? I forget what they're called.
Oh, like the aspartame.
That change the hormonal chemistry of the human body. That's entrainment, right?
Yeah, because all of that takes you... Well, your body has to use a lot of energy to deal with those, kind of things. And that's not energy then that you have to put into... It then goes into survival, repair and survival. It's not energy that you have to put into creativity.
That's right.
And using your imagination and actually looking around and seeing what's going on. All of the electrical buzz of all this is a very insidious...
G5 shortwave radiation devices. This is a really deadly form of entrainment. This is entrainment intended to kill the animal that is being entrained, right?
Yeah.
Right. Shortwave radio signals. Yeah. Right? And microwave radio signals. Right.
That's right. But there's some that's voluntary and some that's involuntary. So, you volunteer, to have your phone sort of, frying your sexual organs because you have it stuck on you the whole time.
Stuck in your bra.
I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
You volunteer to do that.
That's
because
right.
You're so important that you have to be on call to everybody else.
Due to your narcissism and your inveterate egotism, you volunteer to be entrained to devices that are designed to kill you, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
Fry you alive.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And make it so that you can't, if you're into that kind of thing, that you can't have children because they make,
they sterilize.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Another form of entrainment, other forms, the media, the mainstream media, the news. Everybody who watches the 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock news or whatever it is, 8 o'clock news in Europe, on France 2 or whatever it is, totally entrained. Totally entrained.
The structure of our week.
Structure of our week. The calendar is an entrainment device.
Yeah.
Oh, you do this on Friday night, you get drunk. You do this on Saturday, you do this on Sunday. That's all entrainment, right? Pornography is entrainment. Never forget that 65% of the traffic on the internet is pornography. This is a very great fact. Okay, I believe it. I mean, I can't verify it. I haven't done the study. That's entrainment, right? Hollywood entertainment, the propaganda of Hollywood films, all that's entrainment. Women's romance novels, which are the most widely read novels in the world, like 50 Shades of Grey, that's entrainment everywhere you look. So, as I proposed in this talk, when you wake up in the morning, think about mommy and tell yourself, first of all, I cannot go through my day without being in some form of entrainment. And then ask yourself, well, what form of entrainment would I like to be in?
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it?
Right? And I would like to be in entrainment of mommy, of the Planetary Animal Mother. And the whole practice of Planetary Tantra leads you, body, mind, and soul, into that entrainment. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And you can actually feel, in fact, I had a conversation with someone about this, you can feel almost like the hooks with the lines of these artificial entrainment, like you can pop them. You can almost feel them loosening, so you can pop them out, and then you feel the filaments of the entrainment into the bioplasmic filaments of entrainment into the earth.
The entrainment into the earth is material. Everything is material in Planetary Tantra. I have made a very big point of saying to those who listen to me that there is nothing that is spiritual. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, the Latin word spiritus has been contrasted to the word matter. So you have spirit and matter. And so the duality, which is not a tantric duality, but an artificial intellectual duality, is that there is the material around you. You see that, the material world. And then there is an immaterial world. Well, I say, no, there is no immaterial world. There is only a material world. So even when we speak about entrainment, we were just talking about this off recording. The process of entrainment, once you get more deeply into it, following the initial practices, is extremely material, extremely visceral, and something that you feel in your body. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and you know, you feel it in your body in the sense of being held. You actually feel you're held, but it has a very... I was trying to think of an example, a very clear example. Yesterday, I was working out in the garden. I thought, I've had enough working in the garden. I'll go in now and have a drink. As I came to go in to get a drink, my husband came back from doing the shopping. We just went in, unloaded the shopping, and then it started raining. So the timing to be guided, like, go in now, it was the timing for him to come in because it was going to be raining. He didn't, it was a short shower. I didn't want to be out in the rain. So it's a really kind of very, really small example of the very practical day-to-day things where something comes to you, and is it your thought or are you being is it entrainment?
Are you being entrained or induced by the processes of the earth itself?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, and so when you go along with things like that, there's a confidence that comes from it, like it's all going to work out fine. Not a make pretend, fantastic imagination, new agey kind of hope or wishful thinking. It's a knowing that it's absent of mental chatter. Good
point.
Yeah,
yes.
You just do it, and it happens again and again and again. So you find yourself doing things at the right time, and in the right way.
Your anecdote reminds me of a story that comes from Laurens van der Post, who was a Dutch writer and a close friend of C.G. Jung. And Laurens van der Post lived in South Africa, and he recorded firsthand some of the ways of life of the San Bushmen of the Kalahari. And one of the many marvelous stories that he tells is the story about these dwarf people. Really, they were kind of like pygmies. Yeah, they were pygmies of the Kalahari, one of the last surviving indigenous peoples of Africa, along with the Zulus of Credo, Mutwa. How they live in a very intense desert environment, and so water is, of course, essential to them. They have an uncanny ability to find water holes, but they also have another uncanny ability, which he described in this way. There would be a group of the tribesmen together, and at a certain moment, they would all get up, 3 or 4 of them, and they would start running in a certain direction. And they would run and run and run for miles and miles across the Kalahari Desert until they came to a place, and when they reached that place, there would be a sudden downpour of rain. That's entrainment. The fact that they could know an hour ahead of time that it was going to rain at a certain place, and they knew where that place was. How could they know that? Another thing that Lawrence, it's delightful, isn't it? Another thing that Vanderpoel says about the Kalahari is that they could hear the stars. And they said that the stars were hunters. And he said, well, how do you know that? And he said, well, you can hear them whistling to each other, and they make whistling, cracking sounds, which is exactly like the sounds that we make when we're out hunting and we're signaling to each other that the prey are moving in a certain direction. That's entrainment. So our entire species was at one time profoundly entrained to the animating powers of the animal mother in her trimorphic form. And we're getting back to it now. We're going to go back there. That's the only future that I see.
And what about will and self-determination? How does that fit in?
Well, it's a very good question. You know, one of the problems with the white races, and I haven't gone on that one yet, but I am going on record as the greatest white supremacist on the planet, so hold your breath for that one. One of the problems of the white races is that it is the disposition of the white Aryan Caucasian peoples to allow the highest development of individuality of each individual person within their cultures. Therefore, it is not a collectivist or tribal mentality, but it is a mentality that allows the highest development of individualism. So that's why you see that the greatest feats of creativity on this planet and the greatest inventions and the greatest contributions to civilization have all come from the white races, because they have come from the genius of particular individuals. The downside of that, unfortunately, and this is something that the Xenosh exploit, is that high individualization produces a fragmentation, and it works against the solidarity and coherence of the race. So as I speak today, the white races, which has contributed more to the world than any other, for the better, not only for the better, they've done their share of harm as well, but when it comes to the better, they've done a much greater share, are suffering tremendous fragmentation. How do we avoid that peril, which is actually a peril that could destroy the white races? Only by a conscious act of reunification within the greater framework that we're talking about. A conscious act of reunification of the white races within the Sophianic narrative and within the practices that bring us back into attunement.
Yeah.
Attunement and entrainment, please note, those of you who are listening, are interchangeable terms here, aren't they?
But it's a conscious attunement and entrainment. And that's, it's like there's the stories of when the tsunamis came about how all the animals moved, inland to high ground.
Right. And
they survived, whereas
that's unconscious attunement. Right.
Yeah. So we would be aiming to get to the point where we would move inland in the event or move away from any disaster that would be coming, but we would know why we were doing it. Because
we consciously and deliberately choose to re-enter this attunement, entrainment, which is really where we belong. That is really where we can live in this experiment. Yeah. We cannot live outside of it or alienated from it.
No. And it inspires our intelligence and creativity then to act in certain ways and take that forward and make it into something bigger.
Indeed it does. So we're going to conclude this talk today with just reference to a few books that I brought down into the Radio Gaianym studio here because they're illustrative of the subject of entrainment. For instance, here's a book called Moon Rhythms in Nature by Klaus-Peter Endres and Wolfgang Schad. How lunar cycles affect living organisms. Now, if you want to have any argument or any basis for an argument that opposes David Icke's claim that the moon is an artificial satellite of mind control, then just take a look at this book. It has hundreds of examples. I mean, we couldn't exhaust them if we sat here and talked until midnight, could we? Mm-mm. Of the marine life forms.
Shellfish.
The shellfish, the crabs, the fishes, the tides, the polyps in the ocean, the human brain. There are literally thousands of examples of organic processes that are timed to the phases of the moon. Mm. That's entrainment. And the proof is everywhere that you look. So I rest my case on that point. And this is a fantastic book with very beautiful illustrations. I mean, coral in the seas, water buffaloes. I mean, you name it. You cannot name almost any living creature at the microbial level or the animal level or the insect or serpent level or the bird level who does not have an intimate relation to the lunar cycles. It's all alive. It's a living mesh, and you're in it. And to know that you're in it is to be consciously entrained. So this is the kind of stuff that we love. However, there are two other books here. I've had places marked, and I'm going to conclude with that. But I just want to point out a certain technique of mine that you might enjoy using and find helpful sometime. Once you're onto an idea, like here we're onto the idea that the moon is a powerful tool of entrainment, of organic and psychic life. And then you think, well, gee, I've been fascinated by the work of certain people who are talking about consciousness and maybe even talking about the consciousness of nature. And do they say anything about the moon? So I have here two books by this gentleman, Stephen Harrod Brunner, Buhner. I think you know these books. Mm-hmm. And you know his work, The Secret Teachings of Plants, The Intelligence of the Heart in the Direct Perception of Nature, and Plant Intelligence and the Imaginal Realm, Beyond the Doors of Perception into the Dreaming of Earth. Sounds great, doesn't it? Mm. However, I think you share my view of the writings of this particular gentleman.
Yeah, there's a few omissions to say.
A few omissions, right?
Well, I don't know. Sometimes I think, like, is he really just him, or does he have a team of people that write these books for him? But then, when you look, you see he's obviously booked. He's got quite a Goethean kind of approach. But when he talks about language and misses the whole idea of this any kind of overarching narrative, that there is the Earth, but the Earth, what is the Earth? It's just some kind of biomass that just
produces plants. And so he talks about the consciousness of plants, but he doesn't. It's sort of like if you were to say, well, yeah, I met this guy, John Lash, and he's got fantastic amount of knowledge emanating from his pores, but not from the man himself as a totality. It just comes out of his pores. Well, it's like Brunner is saying that the intelligence of the earth is coming out of the pores, which is the plants, but he never, ever says anything about the integral entity of the earth, does he?
No, and it's interesting because I think his institute or something is called the Gaia
Definitely.
Institute.
He hits all the right notes, and yet there's something very seriously missing in this man. One thing is the erotic element is missing. And if you take a look at him, you see he doesn't look particularly erotic. I'm not saying that Planetary Tantra, that you have to be the sexiest person in the world to do it, but it is sexy. It does have a sexy dimension, wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. This work of Brunner is not sexy. It does not refer to the earth as an integral intelligence. And if you look in the index, it says nothing about the moon. Well, how can you write extensively about plants and the living intelligence of the Earth and not include the moon.
Yeah, I mean, here they even plant by the moon still.
That's right.
They still have the old ways here. Yeah, there's, again, there often seem to be these things that just keep you entrained, humming along at a particular level, like, that's right, that corresponds to what it's a confirmation bias.
Exactly.
You know.
And it makes you think you're getting it.
Yeah.
But you are not getting it if she is not named.
That's right.
That's right. Same thing here, Beyond the Brain by Stanislav Grof. I've met Stan Grof. He's a great guy. He's a brilliant intellectual. He gave a strong recommendation for my book, Not in His Image. So here is one of the more advanced teachers of dimensions of the human psyche, the alchemy of the mind, of consciousness of the body, and so forth and so on, beyond the brain. And look in the index. Is there anything about the moon? Nothing.
But you've got a bunch of, it's like the blind man describing the elephant, isn't it?
Exactly. So 2 books that I would cite that do refer to the moon, but don't call it the moon, okay, are The Voice of the Earth by Theodore Roosevelt, which is eco-psychology, and this is a subject of Gaian alchemy, and The Web of Life by John Davidson, which is about the energetic constitution of man and the neuroendocrine connection. Okay? Both of these books refer to something which is called morphic resonance, or the morphic field. Bingo. That, in my mind, tell me what you think, because we haven't talked about this before explicitly, is an exact expression of entrainment. It is to be consciously in a morphic field and to be directed by that morphic field. But as you were just saying, because you are a conscious agent in the field, in a way you can direct the morphic field that you are in.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems less obvious, but it's actually a two-way. It's a two-way connection.
It's a two-way connection.
Because you never lose your ability to your will. You once you know that you're in interaction, you're in a dance, with this field. It goes both ways. But of course, it's bigger than any one individual. The field itself.
It is. And so the morphic field that we are in this divine experiment, is not merely the immediate telluric matrix of the earth, which is nature, the wind, the sky, the animals, the air, the insects, but in a larger sense is the trimorphic field of earth, sun, and moon.
So how would you say that relates to the phylogenetic field?
Well, the phylogenetic field is specifically the field of human memory. And human memory is not just the memory of one person, but it is the memory of the entire species. So the memory of the entire human species is actually a material circuit in this great morphic field. And it is through the moon, and particularly through the cycle of the lunar nodes of 18.6 years, that you can log on to the phylogenetic memory circuit. And this, again, is a practice that falls into the realm of Planetary Tantra, and something that we love to explore and we love to delve into, because recalling the knowledge of our species, the recovery of the true knowledge of our species, is absolutely essential to our future survival. So there's a lot more we could say about these practices, observing the lunar crescent and everything, but I just want to close with this remark. Many of you have probably heard the term morphogenetic field associated with a certain English scientist called Rupert Sheldrake.
I've met him.
Have you met him? Really? I almost met him. How did you meet Rupert Sheldrake?
I met him at a talk that he gave in London at one point, and he was actually talking about how the sun is alive. Curiously, somebody asked him about whether the Earth was alive, and he looked like he was surprised by that question.
Oops! Yeah. It's too bad that he wasn't standing barefoot in some mud at that moment, because he could have looked down at his feet and kind of scrunched his toes, and maybe his toes would have given him an answer to that. Okay? You know, Rupert Sheldrake was offered the opportunity to review my book, Non His Image, which came out in 2006, and he returned it to the publisher saying, "I'm a Christian. I wouldn't read such a book." So anyway, if you can learn something valuable from Rupert Sheldrake's investigation of morphogenetic fields, do so. But let me advise you that Rupert Sheldrake is not the originator by any means of investigation of morphogenetic fields, although he may pretend to be. You want to go look at the work of Lancelot Law White, Whyte, who was really, as far as I know, the pioneering theorist of morphic fields or morphogenetic fields, and also then go back into the natural philosophy of the Romantics and Goethe. And Goethe, although he did not use that term, was definitely deeply involved in the observation of morphogenetic fields. So in conclusion, we're going to call them, for short, the morphic fields. All of nature operates in a series of morphic fields. Right here, right now, outside in the garden, you notice the cherry trees in 2 days are blossoming. What is that? How does that happen? And all around this area they're blossoming because they're all part of a morphic field and they all blossom together. We are part of a morphic field. And to become a conscious instrument of that field, someone who can receive it and transmit through that field, is one of the aims of Planetary Tantra. And we use the moon, we rely on the moon, we love her, and we revere her as the instructor in that process. Okay? So we'll conclude our broadcast on that note. Thank you for coming today. This is quite impromptu.
Thank you.
It's been a delight. And until the next time, what do we say? Be mysterious and keep it real.